Consultancy leaders love to talk about using more tech and then quietly drown in spreadsheets, SaaS tools, and half-baked automations that nobody really trusts. In this episode of the Consultancy Edge with me, Matt Hodkinson, I'm joined by Patrick Kelly-Weller, founder of Adapt Digital, who spends his days making work feel smoother and simpler for growing businesses by redesigning processes and building the right tech around them. We unpack the real difference between automation and AI, when to stitch together off-the-shelf tools versus building something bespoke, and how to spot the small handful of processes that create most of the friction in your firm. Patrick shares a great story of turning a maze of quoting spreadsheets into a simple app, his take on vibe coding with AI, and why so many consultancy websites still miss the mark. If you're thinking about productising your IP, introducing more automation, or just getting your operations out of Notion and Google Sheets, you'll get a lot from this one. Let's dive into my conversation with Patrick Kelly-Weller. Welcome to the Consultancy Edge, Patrick Kelly-Weller. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. Been really looking forward to this because consultancies really do, unless they're operating in that tech space themselves, as many will, they struggle with the technology side of business. A lot of them are trying to augment what they're doing with tech, many different angles and things to discuss today. But first off, let's kick off with what you do at Adapt Digital with your clients.
Amazing. Hopefully a simple question to answer. So our latest kind of positioning around this is making work feel smoother and simpler. And we do that through intentional process design around the way people work, and then leveraging technology to streamline and automate where possible aspects of that don't require a human to be kind of entering data, things like that. So yeah, it's all centered around making work smoother and simpler.
Wonderful. I know we'll probably definitely talk about AI at some point, how that's kind of changing the landscape when it comes to all of that. People seem to think, though, let's hit this one head on, Patrick, that automation is AI, AI is automation. Talk us through that whole dynamic. Give us the real skinny, what's going on.
You must have seen my LinkedIn post on this. Yeah, absolutely. So they're often kind of bandied together. And I think the reason for that is they do often interact with one another. But the act of automation doesn't necessarily require any AI in it at all. So an automation could be something such as taking a record from your CRM and entering it into your accountancy platform, or vice versa, whichever way around you want to do that. But that doesn't require any kind of decision making, any creativity to that. It's literally lift and shift from one system to another without having to do it manually. Where AI can enhance automation is offloading some of the more sort of simplistic, menial decision making that might happen in a workflow, and offloading that to AI so that you're reviewing and benefiting from the outcome and not necessarily having to be involved in every step of getting to that outcome.
Wonderful. And I think people will be aware there's lots of emerging products, lots of legacy products, the likes of Zapier, for example, and what have you. Talk us through the difference, because you're in the space of custom tech, essentially. You are listening to your clients. You are a consultancy. We'll learn about that journey today, I know. But you learn about your clients, their needs specifically, and rather than them go and shop around for many different SaaS products they need to bolt together, you're giving them a custom solution. Talk us through the sort of main differences between going down that route versus the other.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because the SaaS marketplace is becoming increasingly populated. And so therefore the likelihood of finding something that works the way that you want it to is increasing, but the effort to find those systems is also increasing because there's more out there. The reason we promote the sort of bespoke approach is we often find that whenever we're discussing a potential solution to a problem for one of our clients and off-the-shelf solutions are part of that conversation, we find that they do kind of 80–90% of what the client needs them to, but it's that last 10 or 20% that allows them to keep their edge. It's the way that they do things. It's either the format of the document that the system generates or the method of getting there. And it's those little unique elements that I think if everybody subscribes to off-the-shelf software, the world will become quite a mundane sort of vanilla world of business because everyone ended up operating the same way that the software does rather than keeping their edge and finding a solution that allows them to maximize that. Um, and I think with the way that the world is also going technology-wise in terms of AI, from our own sort of abilities to produce software, we're now able to create bespoke solutions a lot quicker than we have done historically by typing out the code literally by hand. That's gradually evolved to today where we can actually spin up at least prototypes of solutions very, very quickly, and then build on those to make them robust and suitable for the longer term. So I think the comparison that's kind of happened historically of, well, I'll just go and get something off the shelf, but a lot quicker, a lot cheaper, is becoming a weaker one in today's world. So
I, I think it's fair to say that it should be that need drives the kind of search for technology. It's that way around. And there's many consultancies out there who have a variety of different tasks that perhaps they're still doing quite manually. It's still firmly embedded in their day to day, but they'd love to get off of their plate. Everything from admin and finance to onboarding, and even into delivery with clients as well, Patrick. So where should a consultancy start when it comes to what do I need? You know, they're so ingrained in the day to day and just doing it and getting it done, thinking, oh, may as well just do that rather than search for a way to automate or technologify it. What's the approach? How do we identify the need?
So we actually have a an acronym that we've trademarked for this that aligns with one of our core values of empathy. It's EAAR. The idea being that it aligns obviously with the name ear and active listening. And the first step of that is establish. And really, I think a lot of businesses, and to be fair, digital transformation, which is probably the bucket that we would find ourselves in as an industry, as a sector, and as a service offering, tends to be known for almost shiny object syndrome a little bit, and finding a nice new shiny toy and trying to find solutions or problems that that can be applied to, rather than analyzing and establishing what the baseline is, how you currently operate, and then assessing that, which is the next step in that process, and identifying your kind of your 80% sort of wins, or your 20% wins rather than have you the 80% impact. And then you can come to addressing them, whether that's through off-the-shelf solutions or something bespoke. I think a lot of businesses, rightfully so, with the amount of noise out there around marketing around these platforms, etc., find the platform first and then figure out how do we use it. This looks interesting. What do we use it for? But actually, fundamentally, you need to, if you want to really maximize the value in it, you want to look at how you're currently operating and find solutions or create solutions that map to that.
So we've seen a number of consultancies who are looking to augment what they're doing with technology, perhaps to automate elements of their process. And this is with a specific focus on delivery now that I'm speaking with. So making more efficient the way that they operate with their clients, and almost productizing what they've got to offer as well into the bargain. I've found that to be a distraction in some cases, an absolute genius move in others, where they do have the bandwidth to support that, to launch and to obviously they've got an audience, a captive audience, if you like, in their existing client base quite often. But how do we manage that kind of that shiny object syndrome that you speak about, and make sure that actually what we're creating is serving us in a positive way?
I guess it comes back to that sort of analysis and being quite honest and I guess open about what the problem is you're trying to solve. There is, as you know, so much buzz around this thing called AI. And I think that is driving that shiny object syndrome. I think people are looking to kind of be on that bandwagon and capitalize on the movement that's happening around us around AI and the buzz, that they're again coming at it from a solution sort of standpoint rather than a problem standpoint. And I think it takes sort of, yeah, a degree of honesty and vulnerability to look at the way that things are currently being done, rather than looking at sort of, yeah, getting caught up in the buzz and the hype around it, I suppose. But again, I suppose in terms of actual sort of tactical things, um, getting close to the people that will be impacted by some of that change is probably the most valuable thing. Often, especially in slightly larger businesses, these decisions are made at management level, and just by sort of natural sort of structures of businesses, they're naturally further away from those actually being impacted by those changes. And so giving those people a voice in the conversation invariably significantly improves the ability for that to land correctly and in a beneficial way. It's not just about the numbers. It's for us, it's about the people as well. People are kind of the second tier in what we do. So we look at the processes first, make sure they're clear, get people aligned around those. Often part of the friction that a lot of businesses feel is just due to a lack of alignment around how things should be done. Whether that's documenting how things are done, sharing that documentation, making it accessible to people. Then there's technology that comes on top of that to boost what is already a strong foundation.
Fantastic. I do want to, you talked about the numbers there. I think it's fair to say, based on our experience with digital transformation, that it can be difficult sometimes to sell the commercial value of what you do. You know, people are living with the technology. It's kind of doing a job, and people kind of have a sense sometimes they need to modernize and innovate and get to a future state. But also the perception is it's going to be a bit of downtime and kind of subpar productivity during those periods of transition. How do you sell your clients, Patrick, and how should we sell the consultancies that might be listening on the idea of adopting that sort of more innovative mindset and throwing themselves into technology projects in this way from a commercial standpoint?
So this is a really interesting one for me because I've been sharing it with a few people recently. It seems to be resonating. Hopefully, it'll obviously resonate with the listeners to this conversation as well. But I feel like this sort of phase era of digital transformation that we're in, that we've been in since the, I don't know, mid 2010s, whatever, a while now, of going from paper-based to at least some form of digital processes, which I hope a lot of businesses are now in. I feel like the next phase the next kind of era we're heading into is more about digital evolution. I think the difference between transformation and evolution is subtle but important. I think people who look on how they're operating from a transformative mindset does naturally bring disruption and chaos and more noise than they might benefit from in the long run. Whereas approaching it from more of kind of an evolutionary standpoint of how do we take what we're doing and just iterate on it and improve on it ever so slightly. So it's almost looking for those 1% gains. Often there are much more significant gains that we find, but the mentality is how do we tweak the dials without completely destroying the dashboard effectively, rebuilding that. So it's as much about mindset as it is about tactics in actually doing it. And again, I think people that go into it with the right mindset end up benefiting without causing some of that sometimes inevitable disruption. But we try and minimize that just from a different kind of mindset.
Talk to me about the timing of this, Patrick, because there may be consultancies out there that are sort of on the fence and just kind of waiting for the right time to modernize, to introduce technology into their delivery and other aspects of their business. When is the right time? And are there kind of we've talked about AI, of course, but are there developments that are kind of accelerating the need to innovate and to digitize what you're doing as well?
That's quite a deep question. I It's ironic because typically when we engage with our clients, they come to us in a state of mind of needing something yesterday, or last month or last year. And so there's always quite a short-term mindset on achieving some sort of outcome. The earliest time is a bit like that. I think is a Japanese or Chinese proverb around the best time to plant a tree. It's that sort of mindset. The sooner you start on this stuff and at least getting clear on how your business actually operates at the moment. A lot of businesses develop and grow almost unintentionally. The growth is intentional, but the impact that has, it happens organically without much real thought. At least that's what we found from our clients. And so that's the challenge, is stopping to intentionally look at how you're working as a business, how the business is structured, who's responsible for what. That usually reveals the most telling thing that usually reveals is that the way work happens is in people's heads. It's not necessarily down on paper. It's not necessarily something that can be shared easily. And therefore, if it's not visible, if it's not down on screen or on paper, it's very hard to iterate on it. So whilst implementing any kind of technological change maybe doesn't need to happen immediately, starting with those foundational elements will definitely give you the right foundation to start looking at what technology can do in today's world. And with the rate of technology as well, the pace of change with technology, the sooner you do that, the more likely it is you're going to be up with at least somewhere in the realms of how quickly things are changing in today's world.
I'm conscious some listeners might be finding this quite conceptual up to this point, Patrick. Would you mind telling us about some of the projects and products that you've created in recent times?
Yeah, I mean, one of our recent projects was for a local underfloor heating company. So they were relying on a maze, I'll call it, of spreadsheets to produce their quotes. And again, they knew there was a better way to do things. They weren't close enough to the world of technology to understand what was out there. But equally, as I mentioned earlier, their sort of part of their USP to their customers is the way they present their quotes. They've looked at off-the-shelf solutions. But that would then result in changing the way they present their information, and they'd lose that unique element. So we help them to sort of make sense of those spreadsheets and understand where the points of friction were, and then we've recreated a solution for them essentially that removes those spreadsheets. So they now use a web-based application in their browser that produces the same sort of PDF output they would generate from those spreadsheets. But in about a fraction, I think we got it down to about a third of the time that it took them previously. And the reliability and consistency of that output was also significantly increased. So that's one example, but we've obviously done many other things from SMEs up to enterprise that we're happy to talk about.
Fantastic. How do you approach project management? I know that this is an area that many consultancies kind of struggle with, and I guess the observation is, and I've talking about my background in IT consultancy for many years, I don't think I ever encountered a project that happened on time and on budget. Talk to us about how can we maximize the kind of success potential of projects like this, and especially technology projects.
It comes back to and this kind of ties into the point I made earlier about having kind of an evolutionary kind of 1% mindset. Is yes, the change that we're envisaging longer term is much more significant, larger scale, etc. For us, we work on all of our clients' projects in a sprint basis. Not particularly innovative. That's not particularly new to the industry, sadly. But we are very intentional with breaking that down to be very small, deployable changes of work. So it's not just about breaking down the billing and we're still working, you're still not going to get an end result for 6, 9, 12 months, whatever the longer term project or the duration of the project might be. It is about making those scopes of deliverables as small but as valuable as possible. That way you are working in that kind of iterative, valuable approach that isn't just about taking a massive project and saying, we're starting here, but you still won't be able to use it until over here. So that's probably the biggest benefit that we've seen is shifting to that. Historically, we were very much kind of, I guess you'd call it like a waterfall approach, which is, as you say, was very much rigid, would usually result in the end solution maybe no longer meeting the demands of the requirements that we set out at the beginning, because time changed. But since we've shifted to that kind of more flexible, dynamic approach, has definitely helped us to provide value to our clients on a quicker timescale, and also the end solutions that ends up meeting their demands.
And again, to kind of hark back to my consulting days, and specifically in quality assurance, I know that's going to be kind of top of mind for many. How do you approach that? How do you make sure that the outputs that you're putting out meet the needs technologically, but also of the users that you're delivering to as well?
So we have started to adopt technology more in that sense. I think one of the biggest use cases we've had for utilizing an LLM has been in documenting test cases from requirements that we've gathered from a client. Typically, they're quite sort of transactional statements. They are factual statements and they're based on those fundamental requirements. So we're not necessarily using it to help us design what the solution to be, but we're using it to create a checklist of what things we need to be testing against. And then from there, we leverage automated testing that helps us to make sure that the solutions we produce meet the requirements technologically. But then fundamentally, yeah, it does still come down to user testing. A system can work, but whether it works the most efficiently and effective way for humans that are ultimately going to be using these systems most of the time, that's when the user acceptance testing really comes into its own for us. And we kind of invest quite heavily in that space. As I say, fundamentally, yes, we're building technology, but it's a human that ends up using it at the end of the day.
I want to transition into talking about you and your consultancy. A good way to do that, I guess, is what have you developed for yourself? How did presumably you see problems in your business all the time, points of friction and needs that need to be met and developed for. So how have you approached your own kind of systems and everything that makes your business tick?
I mean, this will probably come as no surprise, but we do suffer from the kind of cobbler with the broken shoes analogy. Things are definitely, ironically, not as smooth as I would still like them to be in Adapt. And there are definitely gaps that we have, but we've been leaning quite heavily on automations ourselves. So things like billing. So we use ClickUp, for example, as our kind of internal project management system at the moment. Again, not necessarily happy about that. Sorry to anyone that might be from ClickUp, maybe listening to this. It's not you, it's us. But yeah, so we've got an integration there so that when anything ever moves from a in progress status to a done status, that automatically creates a draft invoice for us based on the work and time estimates and the time tracked. It doesn't send it yet because we're not not kind of handing over the reins entirely to AI, but it at least automation rather. But it does at least make that particular job, just removes that one piece of admin that anybody would otherwise have needed to be doing. Just makes that flow a little bit smoother. But we've got ambitions to create sort of more. I've always had a desire to create a system, and this goes back to kind of one of my origin stories, I suppose. When I learned to code, I built my dad at the time. He was a painter and decorator. I built him an invoice generator, and I gave it the name Biz Butler. And over the years, in my head, that kind of concept has evolved. And there are some platforms out there now that are sort of promising to offer you AI employees essentially, and that's not what this would be. But I do feel there's a demand out there for connected systems that all talk to one another and ideally aren't set in stone in the way that they are designed. You have the building blocks that you can customize without the headache of that. But at the moment, it's still very much just a bit of a pipe dream. It's in the back of my head still rattling around.
Just want to think about it as well, and still in the tech realm, vibe coding becoming a big thing now. Presumably something you've got to sort of invalidate for your clients. They might be thinking, well, we could just go and do that rather than employing Adapt or speaking with Patrick. What are your views on vibe coding, the kind of state it's currently in, the potential of it? What is it good for? What is it absolutely terrible at? What's your viewpoint there?
It really excites me, if I'm being honest. And that might be controversial as someone who's a bit more of a sort of traditional software developer. But software for me has always just been a kind of a tool, a mechanism. The motivator for me has been enabling people to work easier, and technology as it's evolved is becoming increasingly accessible. AI for me and LLMs especially is a technology that if I look back over my relatively short career, but my kind of time spent in technology, sort of 10, 15 years, typically speaking, the more complex and powerful a technology has been, the more specialist but individual you needed to leverage that.
Yeah.
Whereas AI, especially LLMs, is they are incredibly powerful, incredibly versatile, but also incredibly accessible. Anyone with a phone or an internet connection and a device can do something with them. So vibe coding for me, I think, is a very exciting opportunity for people that have historically not had the time or the inclination to learn how to build software, to give them an insight into creating a solution to their problem. I think where it still falls a little flat and runs into challenges is the scalability of what it produces. It's great at the proof of concept stage. It's great for getting to maybe understand a little bit more about how technology, especially kind of web technology, web apps, etc., are built. But when it comes to scaling that, that may be, I think that's probably still its weakness. And there are things happening in the space. Context engineering is one of the kind of more recent developments in the space, which goes beyond prompt engineering,
Mm.
um, which ends up producing a more robust output for the first run. But it's still, yeah, we use it internally to for some of those more menial development tasks, we'll use it to do a lot of the grunt work, and then it's down to us to review obviously what it's doing and making sure that it meets what we would have done by hand essentially. But it means we can deliver things much quicker for our clients, and also for our developers, it gets some of those more menial admin bits out of their hands.
I probably screwed up a little bit there on that question because I didn't explain what vibe coding was, and I'm sure we've got at least a couple of listeners who might not be aware of it, even though it is. I don't know if it's word of the year or if it's been entered into the Oxford English Dictionary this year, but it's one of the two. Vibe coding, developing code with the use of AI, natural language to code, the products like Base 44, Bolt, Replit, those kinds of things, Lovable as well. Sorry about that. Is it a good sort of use case for you, Patrick? If people are vibe coding, they get to that point of frustration when they recognize they've probably built an MVP or a good concept, but that it's not scalable, it's not usable really for them. Can they then come to you with that code and say, Patrick, take this? Is that a good start for you?
It can be a good start. It can be a good start in sort of one or two ways. So it can either give us a much better insight as to what they're trying to build. We can see a working example of what they have in mind. But it might be that the foundations it has created aren't necessarily built for scale or security, etc. So we may need to have a think about how we approach that. Again, from as much as we can from an iterative mindset rather than you need to nuke this and start again, but we know what you're trying to do now. There's also the obviously the opposite to that is that actually what they've produced is a fairly good foundation, but the limitation with these LLMs and the vibe coding approach is context. And as systems get bigger, the amount of context they can hold at the moment means that they can't quite understand everything. And so they might fix something over here that then breaks something over there. So that's where we can potentially get involved to help when it gets to that scale, I guess. But ultimately, whenever we approach any kind of project that comes to us through that kind of path, it's really about how can we continue to build on what's there rather than saying, well done, but now you need to start again and we'll do it properly, sort of thing.
Patrick, as well, last question on tech, I promise. You've got a background in website development as well. I know that for many consultancies, their website is something that needs a bit of work, iterating upon. I've seen some terrible websites. Let's just call it as it is. What is some of, in your experience, what are some of the things that people need to be sort of bearing in mind when they're thinking about revamping the website? If they don't know they need to revamp, what are the kind of highlights of, this is what you need to look out for? If you're experiencing X, Y, and Z, it's probably time for a bit of a website refresh.
I think the interesting thing when it comes to websites is there are so many different pillars to having a good website, and they're all integral to having a well-performing website. So the more kind of human element that I think a lot of people overlook, and this probably applies more broadly to kind of marketing in general, is that we typically create our website from our standpoint and what we want to say to the world, rather than from the standpoint of the people that are potentially out there looking for what we do. It's an exercise that we're going through at the moment, and it's very easy for us to fall back into that mindset of, well, let's just talk about us,
Mm.
um, and forget about who it is you're trying to talk to. So the messaging, the copy, all of that sort of stuff is important. I think the creative element is becoming increasingly important. Again, in the kind of world of, call it AI slop that we're hearing online, from a content point of view, I worry that a lot of these kind of vibe coded solutions, especially in the website space, where having a bit of a distinct aesthetic or um, visual standpoint is going to become increasingly grey and bland, where everyone's using similar tools to produce similar outcomes. So yeah, the visual standpoint, I think that's definitely an area where technology is still struggling to help. It might help to grease the cogs a little bit when you're trying to think about sort of creative solutions and how to maybe position something. But yeah, the actual act of coming up with something unique and distinct, I think, is still very much down to us humans. And then you've got the other pillars around security. Performance is a big one, especially in today's world. No one wants to wait for a website loading, least of all kind of search engines and AI engines. So making sure your website's quick, up to date, secure, etc., are kind of more, I guess, maintenance pieces that I'd definitely uh, kind of form part of those pillars. But yeah, I think the foundational one that a lot of businesses, again, including us in the past, have struggled with is remembering who you're building the website for, and it's not for you essentially.
I've always been a fan of that more diagnostic sort of experience when you visit a website. That one of the first things you should see is, which of the following best describes you, so that you can then take people down those paths, deliver the content that they need, and be more diagnostic, as I say. But great, good, really good advice, Patrick. So finally, tell us about your journey through consultancy. You kind of alluded to your early days in coding and obviously developing that solution for your dad. How did you get into this world? How did you form Adapt and whatever came before it? What's your journey look like?
So yeah, I got a bit of a geeky obsession with tech at a young age coming out of school. I probably started to build websites when I was in, I don't know, I probably would have been about 11 or 12, I guess. It started off originally with a little online radio station with a friend of mine who was a hobbyist DJ at that age as well. He had a couple of decks and stuff at home. But he found a embeddable kind of player that you could put into a web page and it would stream whatever you're playing to it, which was quite cool. He didn't have particularly much interest in that bit. He was more interested in obviously the music and the art, as it were. Yeah, he piqued my interest with that. And then we wanted to kind of add a bit of functionality to that to allow people to like request songs, and obviously it never became anything. But that, I suppose, was probably the very earliest spark that I had in terms of the thing that hooked me the most about it was the sense of progress and achievement of overcoming that next problem, that next thing that we wanted to try and do, and then figuring out how to do that, and learning obviously the technology behind it. So that's really the fundamental for me, or the foundation. And then, yeah, fast forward a few years, went to college, etc. Dropped out though, college dropout. Didn't go to university, and just organically started freelancing, friends and family, etc. And that has just continued to snowball, effectively. In those early days, again, as you say, I was very much kind of web development, kind of 12, 13 years ago, when you still kind of need to know somebody with my skill set to create a website, which obviously is now no longer the case, at least not to create a simple one. Yeah, and then sort of saw that transition happening and moved into the world of software development, where our skills were more applicable and more necessary, where you're building kind of integrations and APIs and all this sort of stuff, smart tech, I suppose. Yeah, and then more recently, as I say, has evolved and kind of expanded beyond the technology, but from a technological standpoint, looking more broadly at how businesses operate, and helping them to understand how to adapt digitally, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, as I alluded to earlier, your kind of background was in websites, as you say, for quite a while. You've evolved that into broader kind of software projects, and I'm sure every day is different when it comes to the projects that you're working on, the work you're delivering. Was that the main driver? How much of that was about you and your passion for software? How much of it was about market need, or was it something else that factored in?
I think it was probably a blend of the two, to be honest. One of the things that became quite apparent in the early days of those kind of website projects we were doing was that it was quite sort of bookended, because we didn't have the marketing expertise, nor did we particularly have the inclination to develop the marketing expertise. We would build lovely websites for clients, hand them over, and then they would either fall flat because they're then not driving any traffic towards it, or they then go and work with a marketing agency. We would sometimes refer them on to one of our marketing agency partners. And so it's quite a sort of open closed project basis. So there was that element. I think as I mentioned, I saw this kind of evolution of platforms like WordPress and Squarespace and Wix, etc., that were coming about, that I think meant that, especially in the SME marketplace, the ability for somebody to either have an internal kind of marketing assistant, or somebody with a bit of kind of computer know-how could probably spin up quite an appealing, visually appealing website, without needing to work with us. And I wasn't comfortable with the idea of charging somebody for something which they could effectively do themselves, because we didn't have the supporting gubbins around it to help them actually do something with it once it was built. So there was that aspect. That was probably the main driving aspect, as I saw the industry, that space, going in a sort of DIY direction. And software, I see, whilst it's remaining slightly more stable because of the complexities of building software versus building kind of everyday websites. I do see, with the likes of LLMs and things coming about, and vibe coding, as we've spoken about, I do see it going in a similar direction. And that's why we've kind of evolved to help our clients better understand how to leverage the technology, rather than what technology they should be building. Whilst that's still part of it, it's kind of looking more holistically at businesses for us. So yeah, I guess market demands would probably be the biggest pressure, but it remains kind of tied back to my own interest of creating solutions for people that actually make them work easier.
New business is always a big challenge in consultancy and in agency. I know that, much like us, you kind of straddle that world of consultancy agency. Um, what have been some of your sort of big routes to market? What's worked for you in terms of new business, connecting you with clients that see the value in digitizing, modernizing, innovating?
I think it's interesting because in this world that we're living in, people are increasingly craving a sense of connection and human connection. So whilst it's been a foundational pillar to business in general, networking and building and relying on our own network of relationships is definitely fundamental to our background, which I'm sure again won't be particularly news to most people listening to this. I know it's a big sort of backbone to most consultancies, most agencies, those fundamental relationships. But something which we're working on more recently, which is in the kind of in the pipeline, is creating our own community. I see community as being quite a fundamental pillar to new business, but also just to society, as we become increasingly disconnected through video calls and things like that. So we're producing something called We Adapt, which is essentially helping people to come together that are aware of the changes that are happening around them, don't yet have the confidence or the ability to do much with it, but know that they potentially feel the pressure to do something with it, and hopefully give them access to experts like ourselves and like others that we'll hopefully bring into the community when it launches, to just feel safe to experiment, and learn from others. We did run something very briefly, which aligns somewhat with this kind of ethos, this concept, which we called the Code Collective, a few years ago, kind of pre-COVID, that was designed to bring people that were interested in learning to code along into a room with people that had been coding for many years, and I guess were experts in the field, and give them that kind of support network. So it's kind of developing on that concept. As I say, more broadly looking at kind of just the rate of technology and how it's advancing, and giving people that kind of that safety net, that comfort blanket to be curious and have the courage to tinker with things.
Love that idea. And with the name as well, presumably you're going to be on the same scale as We Work at some point. Yeah, like the idea.
Who knows? Who knows? One day.
Knows, possibly not with the same ending. Okay, so I know that you do a lot of, because I mean, this is really how we met, isn't it, Patrick, through peer networking as well. Talk to me about any kind of strategic partnerships. What's working well for you in that regard? Do you work, play nicely with other consultancies? If you do, what sort of flavor of consultancies are you working with? And how do you make those partnerships work in a way that serves you both?
It's interesting you mentioned a moment ago about us being sort of a bit of a consultancy agency blend. We're increasingly finding ourselves having more consultative conversations with our clients and being less about the doing. But I think that's where we still have the capacity internally, and the capabilities to actually get on and build stuff for people. I think that's where we partner quite well with other consultancies that are maybe more heavily focused on that consultative aspect, and maybe don't have the resource immediately in-house to deliver on some of the things that they're advising. So that's kind of one aspect. Historically, where we were kind of website focused, obviously other creative agencies, again, where they didn't have the technical capabilities in-house to do what they were potentially designing for their clients, has always been beneficial to us. But yeah, for me, I think fundamentally it just comes down to a sort of ethos of knowledge sharing and openness, and I guess trying to provide value without any expectation of anything in return. I was very fortunate, bit of a side story here, but one of my very early books that I read when getting into business was Give and Take by Adam Grant. And that mentality of being a giver, and not expecting anything in return, whilst has been, I think, quite heavily popularized since. I think it's done us in good stead, and that's what we try and kind of maintain today, is just being a helpful body that people can call upon.
Yeah, well said. Okay, Patrick, what does the future hold? What are your goals for Adapt? Where are you kind of going? Where are perhaps you evolving the way that you work, your proposition in the future? What's your aim for the business?
What does the future hold? If only we knew, hey. I think it's really interesting because the again, back to the kind of the rate of change of the world, it's hard to really have much of a future beyond sort of 6 months, at least a sort of fairly confident view of the future of 6 months. Um, where historically I've been quite focused on growing the team internally, becoming more open to this sort of associates model, and developing and strengthening our own relationships with other partners. And I think it's sort of, we're better together, we're stronger together type ethos. And sticking to our own strengths is definitely something that's developed over the recent sort of 18 months. Knowing where we are strongest and where we're weakest, and then developing on that. So I think continuing to build in that mindset, doubling down on what we're best at, which is applying technology in sort of a relevant and understandable way to clients that are maybe less technically competent. But yeah, I think it's hard to really say. I think we're going to definitely continue to double down on leveraging the technology that others might be seeing as a bit of a threat to what they're doing. I think it makes sense to lean into that and help both our clients and ourselves maximize the opportunity there, and also identify and keep up to date with the weaknesses in that as well. So yeah, it's hard to say really much beyond 6 months, but we'll definitely still be remote.
That's a bit of a cop out, if you don't mind me saying, Pat. There's very little uncertainty in the world. I mean, come on, there's nothing going on. Listen, we have reached that time where, and I'm very conscious actually, I didn't prep you for this, but it's our regular feature that you may have heard, our quick fire feature, Snog, Marry, Avoid. Not in the traditional sense. A snog, for example, is a quick win. When it comes to the work that you do or something that you've experienced or deployed in your business, what's a quick win that can help our listeners to make progress really, really fast?
Oh, blimey, that is yeah. You're right. You haven't prepared me. I think a quick win would be, I guess, curiosity, and that's maybe a weird thing to say, but in the context of this question, but just being curious about technology. It's not necessarily a scary thing. It can maybe have kind of scary impacts if you go too deep with it without knowing what you're doing. But I think in the world of LLMs and the world of technology today, where it is so accessible, maybe don't be so afraid of it. If you haven't yet kind of played with ChatGPT or Claude or any of these kind of products that are out there, or Replit, as we spoke about earlier on, you can't really do any harm in just exploring them. And it might uncover and reveal sort of opportunities for you to delve a little bit deeper.
Yeah, it's a bit of a sandbox, really, isn't it? That you can't do
Yeah.
too much damage for sure. Okay, a marry is something for the long term. What could you absolutely not live without in your business, Patrick?
So I've recently, if we're talking tools, I've recently, about kind of 3 to 6 months ago, I picked up a new platform called Reclaim.ai, which is a Dropbox product, and it's essentially a time blocking calendar management tool. So it feeds in, it ingests all of my tasks that I've got to do, which I give time estimates and priorities to, and it then basically manages my calendar for me, which is wonderful. Can highly recommend that. There are a few out there, but I ended up going with Reclaim because it was a Dropbox product, and I felt a little bit kind of safer giving access to some of that information. So that's definitely something that I'm clinging on to, and I hope doesn't go anywhere anytime soon. But in terms of kind of mindset, yeah, I think being aware of how things are happening, and spending the time to document that is definitely a longer term strategy that will pay you well, I think.
Great. And lastly, avoid. What would you ditch, or what would you advocate the listeners ditch from their business that won't be serving them right now?
Oh, blimey. I'm trying not to answer it in a sort of antithesis to the other points I've just made. Um, hmm. I'd probably, if I was going to be cheeky, I'd say ditch spreadsheets.
Right.
It's funny. I always kind of refer to them as like the second best tool for everything, and they're the easiest thing to create a workaround in. So yeah, if I was to be a little bit cheeky, I'd probably say ditch spreadsheets and look at maybe alternative options for that. But
That's interesting. One of our clients actually said that, and to quote them, spreadsheets are my grandma's BI tool of choice.
yeah,
Uh, so, giving it that outdated appeal. Patrick,
yeah.
where can thank you so much for today. Where can people find you? How can they engage with you and yeah, find you online?
So yeah, obviously, like anyone else is in the professional world, I'm on LinkedIn, Patrick Kelly-Weller, fairly distinct surname. Hopefully, there's not many of us else out there, other than my wife. Our website, adapt.digital, if anyone wants to go and find us there, slash community, if you want to go and look at the landing page we put together for our community. Yeah, I think that's probably the two main places I'm online at the moment.
Fantastic. That's a fascinating talk. It's been really good to chew the breeze with you and chew the breeze, chew the fat, shoot the breeze. Thank you
I
for
never know.
joining us today, Patrick.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay.